Hello YouTube, this is Pullin, and I'm going to show you a game of mine from over a year ago. This game was played at the Third Coast Challenge tournament on February 25 of 2007. And the tournament that I played before that was the Chicago Open of 2003. So this tournament represents a layoff of about 4 years from chess. I wasn't playing competitive chess at that time. So I entered into this tournament because there was a special promotion on a USCF membership for young adults. You had to be 24 or under to claim it. So I decided that I would enter this tournament for fun to see if I could still play. So I hadn't really studied chess seriously at all for 4 years before playing this game. My rating was 1822 at the time, and in the first round I got paired against an expert. His rating was 2043, and I had black pieces. It was a Scotch, and I captured on d4, and then played knight f6, and he played knight to c3, which is the 4-knight Scotch. And I didn't know anything about this at the time, but I figured that it shouldn't be that bad for black because he hasn't violated any opening principles. So white captures, and this is all main stuff, bishop d3. And now I played a move that is not the main move. d5 is the main move here for black. Black should try to dissipate white's space advantage immediately. So d5 has been played lots and lots of times, but I didn't know anything about the move, so it wouldn't have been right for me to try it. I played this move, queen e7, anyway. It is actually a line, but I didn't know it. So I was just making up stuff. I want to play a small pawn center and try to get active pieces and generate some threats against his king. Because one of the things about the Scotch is that the main defender of white's king side, the knight on f3, is missing. So sometimes black can launch some interesting attacks against the white king. So white castled to get off of the e-file, and then I didn't castle here. I played d6. So really, black, if he's playing conservatively, he should just castle his king. But I decided to play my idea, and he played bishop to d2, and possibly wants to trade off for this bishop on b4, and if that trade happens, I want it to happen on b6, so I can capture with the a pawn, making my pawns healthier and opening up the file for my rook. So that's why I play bishop a5 here. And now he plays a move, I think it's iffy. He plays queen to e2. And I don't really like this because you're using your queen for something that a rook could do. The most logical move in this position is rook e1, because my queen and king are still on this e-file, and there are some pretty strong possibilities of the e5 sacrifice, which opens up lines for the knight and bishop behind the pawn. I mean, the drawback of rook e1 is the f2 pawn loses a defender, but there's no crushing attack against f2 at this time for black. So I think rook e1 was the move, but he played queen e2. I mean, I assume because he plays the Scotch, he's an expert, he's very experienced in these positions, and he's going for a plan with the rooks on e1 and f1, where he's pushing his e and f pawns and trying to maximize that Scotch space advantage. And in fact, that's what he is trying to do, as we talked about after the game. So I played knight to g4, and this move is bad. I should probably just castle here. But knight to g4, I played it with the intention of, if he plays h3, coming to e5 and blockading this pawn on e4. But I overlooked this move, knight to d5, which luckily he didn't play. Neither of us saw this knight to d5 move. But because black is hanging two pieces, pawn takes, knight is forced, and now bishop takes. And there's no way to blockade the pawn on e4 anymore because of this pawn on d5. In fact, there's no way for black to keep the position closed, which will be a problem for him because his development is sort of backward. If black tries to keep the position closed with pawn to d4, then there is this bishop check, and it cannot be met easily because bishop to d7 is met by queen takes g4. So this would have been unpleasant for me. Luckily, he did not play knight to d5. Instead, he played rook a to e1, following through with his plan. But I don't like this move because it takes away this square from his queen. His queen has very little mobility here. And if I knew what I was doing, I probably would have played the knight to e5 here. Because if he's got all these pieces, queen, rook, bishop, knight, they're all staring at the back of this pawn's head. And if this pawn never moves, if it's blockaded by a piece, then all these lines that could be opened up by an e5 pawn sacrifice, they'll stay closed, so white's pieces will stay inactive. Queen e5 is also an option for me, according to Crafty, but I think I'd rather play knight to e5 there. But instead, after rook ae1, I played bishop to b6, which is also okay. I want to relocate the bishop to get on this diagonal towards his king. And he could play e5 at this point, the temporary pawn sacrifice, which opens up the scope for all these pieces that were behind the pawn. So, say after knight takes, he could play bishop to f4 and start this giant attack on the e-file. But instead of doing that, he played h3. And now I still should play knight to e5. This is the best move. And actually, Crafty thinks black has a slight advantage here. My thinking is this pawn is blockaded, and if white moves the king to free up the f-pawn to challenge the knight, black can play g5. And the idea is to keep the knight on e5 as long as possible, and maybe also play h5 and g4, try to open up the white king side. So that would have been the sane move. I played the insane move here in h5. The justification for h5 is that the knight is untakeable, because pawn takes, bishop takes, and this queen has no squares. f3 is impossible because of the pin. So he cannot take the knight. But just because I can play h5 to support the knight doesn't necessarily mean I should have. So here he played a blunder, but he had two reasonable moves here. One is the move that he pointed out to me after the game, which is bishop to f4, challenging the e5 square. And I didn't see this line during the game. Or rather, right after the game, I suggested that black play. I suggested queen f6 here, I think. But actually, I think g5 might be better, because if the bishop runs away, then I can keep on chasing the bishop and then trade on h2, and then check king h1, and then come to e6 with the bishop, and then bring my king to d7 and swing this rook over to the king side, following up, trying to crack open the white position. So this, I felt, would have been reasonable for me. It's not necessarily about checkmating the white king anymore. It's about dark square control. If he's forced to play f3, then this will be terrific for me, because all his forces will be behind this e4 pawn, which can't move. So that was just some analysis that I did on this. Also, he can play e5 here, a move that I've mentioned several times, which does sacrifice a pawn, but it opens up the scope for all these pieces behind the pawn, so white gets plenty of compensation, because black's development is weird. So instead he played knight a4, with the idea of removing the bishop on b6, which frees up some of the pressure on his position. But knight a4 is a blunder. And if you pause the video now, see if you can see it by yourself. I'll show you in a couple seconds. Okay, welcome back. The move that I play here is queen to e5, blockading the e-pawn and getting another piece into the action. The threat is queen h2 mate. And what can you do about this? There is no f4 because the pawn is pinned. If g3, then just queen takes because the f-pawn is unable to take because of the pin and its mate in 1. He played pawn takes in the game, and what's amusing is I can still play bishop takes and win his queen. But I played pawn takes pawn and he resigns because there's no way to stop queen h2. So that is my first game after a 4-year layoff from chess.